Hey, what's up, guys? This is Lucas Burnley, along with my co host TJ Schwartz, and you are listening to the Edge and Flow podcast. How's it going, TJ?
Doing really well. I'm
Well,
I'm
you're a little bit
tired.
tired
I'm
today.
tired, but I'm happy, dude. I'm actually having a great week. But
Okay.
yeah,
We're gonna swing back into why you're tired. That's gonna kind of be the topic of the show today. But first, this is super exciting. I don't know why this is so exciting, but we had a listener call in with a correction from a previous episode. And I love that. So basically, I was talking about some of like the knife centers, knife cities around the globe. And I said that the knife city in Spain was Toledo. And this is incorrect. I think I knew it was incorrect, but now I definitely know it's incorrect. So he pointed out that the primary hub for cutlery in Spain is actually a town called Albacete. And just so you guys have like some context, and if you want to like look up a few brands or anything like from there, we have, let's see, Arcos. So it's arcos.com, ARCOS, joker.es, and one that most people will know is Muela. So yeah,
yeah.
I stepped in it.
Albacete, Spain. Yeah.
Albacete,
And if
Spain.
you didn't catch the last episode, we were just riffing on like kind of hot spots of knife manufacturing around the globe. It was kind of a spontaneous little conversation, and we were naming off kind of the like knife city capitals of the world.
Yep.
And that we had the guy email us from Spain. He's from Spain and had a little input on what we chose for the Spanish capital.
Yep. He's
Yeah.
from Madrid. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think the miss, like in my head, I think maybe swords used to come from Toledo, and I think there was like a logical progression there
Yeah.
that was not
Yeah.
actually logical.
Right.
So so I've been checking out some of these companies. Just kind of cool to see, and it's crazy because you forget that for all that we know about knives, or like if you're a collector and follow knives, sometimes once it crosses the borders, it like gets muddy. So
Yeah.
I'm curious if you guys know of any other hubs around the world where knives are like the primary business, or like it's like a family
Yeah.
industry. We would love to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And also corrections. I mean, we love getting the corrections.
Yeah.
It's good to have insights. So if you're listening and if you get a little sting because you feel like there's a factual,
Yeah.
contradiction, then let us know.
Yeah. Fact check us. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
All right. You want to get into it?
Let's do it.
I feel like we have talked about this at least in passing, but today's episode is what is work? Okay.
What is it?
That's a really good question. It's something that I think you and I we're experiencing it in different ways, right? I think for me, there's like a sense of existential dread when I'm doing things that don't feel familiar as work, but I know they're valuable. But let's go into your night last night.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have my parts surface ground, all my custom knives that I'm making, all my overlands and confidants and whatnot that you hear about. And they're surface ground, which means, you get a sheet of steel, real rough and coarse. It's been milled and hot rolled at a factory. And so it has to be ground perfectly flat and even. And it's kind of hard to source that. And most knife manufacturers have to do that. And so a lot of companies are doing it in-house, and I don't have the space to do it in house. And so I've been having to have help from local Boise companies to do the surface grinding. But it seems like with almost every knife manufacturer, like inside their own company, surface grinding is often a bottleneck for them. And so I've had a hard time having like super reliable surface grinding. I've gotten good results from the people that have helped me out, and I've appreciated that a lot. But they're bottlenecks for them, so it's kind of hard to justify doing work for me. So I started to think about what's a solution that's permanent. And I mentioned it before, but I told my brother-in-law about this kind of niche, and he's kind of really, really into tinkering with machines and really good at fixing stuff. And I told him, there's a niche in the industry that I'm in, and it's like someone should be doing more surface grinding from a third party level, like a vendor that is dedicated to knives. Because if you've ever tried to surface grind a knife, it's kind of technical compared to, say, surface grinding like a casting, because a lot of regular machine shops would surface grind like a cylinder head for an engine, and
Right.
it's a big hunk of steel. It's not going to warp on you.
Yep.
It's heavy. It diffuses the heat. But a little thin part like a knife, like it takes some detail and some nuance. And I told my brother-in-law, I'm like, if you get a machine and you learn how to do this with knives and you get it right and you get this system down, I think you have a niche right there that you could probably help a lot of people out, and you can definitely help me out. So he went and bought one a couple of months ago, and he's been working on getting his shop all tuned up. And I've been kind of telling him that a batch was coming, that I have knives coming, and that we can get ready. And so he got ready in time, and it was awesome. And yesterday, I picked up the water jet blanks in Boise, and I went to take them to my brother-in-law's, and he works nights with his day job. That's kind of contradictive, but he works nights, and so he basically is on a sleep schedule right now where he sleeps during the day. And so I knew he was going to start to grind these at night, and I was like, well, I trust him fully, and I think he has a great like eye for detail. But I know both of us are completely inexperienced with surface grinding, but I think two heads were probably better than one if we're both
Totally.
kind of overseeing this first attempt to grind these parts. And
Well,
so
you know what you want out of the end product.
yeah,
He's like working to figure out how to get there, but there's no version where just having him is a better solution.
yeah. Because having like a feedback loop too. It's
Yeah.
like if I'm sleeping and he texts me like, "Is this the finish you're looking for?
Right.
Is this the thickness? Whatever."
Yep.
Like I wanted to be there, just to accelerate everything. And so I took the parts over there, and once again he wakes up like 4 or 5 in the afternoon. I had worked all day in my shop. I take the parts there, and we get to work getting like this recipe figured out for surface grinding these knives. And I didn't leave his shop until 6 a.m. So it was like
Ugh.
basically starting in my shop at like 6:30 in the morning is a full 24 hours of like basically running machines. And then
Ugh.
came home. I don't sleep very well like in daylight. I just, even if I'm that tired, and I slept for like 2 or 3 hours and then got back in my shop, got my machines running again. So basically been running machines for 28 of the last like 32 hours. So
Okay.
I'm kind of about at the end of my rope.
now you're
So if
and
I
now you're
space
recording
out,
a pod.
just be aware that's why.
Just staring at the
Yeah.
wall.
Yeah.
Well, so that is totally in line with what you're doing. It's like you're scaling, you're creating an internal process externally. It's pretty cool. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you have a subcontractor.
Yeah. It's like a
So
satellite. Yeah.
it's like a satellite, which oddly enough, like going back to, the cutlery cities is actually kind of how a lot of this starts, I
Mm-hmm.
think, because you
Mm-hmm.
have, like, if you look at Maniago, you have a family that is producing a knife. They probably get to a point where there's some process that is taking too much time, and a neighbor down the street is able to pick that up,
Mm-hmm.
tumbling or, and I think it still happens in the modern context, but I think back in the day, that was really
Mm-hmm.
how businesses grew. And
Yeah.
then probably at some point you're like, hey, all right, like you have this skill and this tool. We're building this building. You bring it in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So pretty cool because you're utilizing your manufacturing capabilities right now to expand your business, but you're not expanding your footprint.
Right. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I told him, I said, like I really appreciate you helping me out here, because I don't have really any time left on my schedule to actually be the guy that runs this.
Right.
And I don't have the space. So it was getting to the point where if I didn't have a solution for surface grinding, like I was going to have to rent like an industrial space only for the sake of the surface grinding, and then possibly hire an employee. And I'm like, if I had help, and then if he can grow a business on his own, like expand that it's kind of an ideal scenario. So I'm really happy. And I was there for a long time. Like I was probably 13 hours we were out there, but we did get parts off of that were perfect. I mean, like we finally got there. And if you ground knives before, like there's a tiny little window of feeds and speeds, dressing the wheel, getting the coolant in just the right spot. Like we had to kind of suss out like all this stuff. Just boom, like bang it out just
I've
one
always
night.
felt that surface grinding in particular is like a combination of science and art, or like witchcraft, because there's so many, like when TJ is saying that you can't just go to any shop. I mean, most machinists know how to grind like a hardened piece of D2. it's the variables that come in. You're dealing with something that's like long and thin. It ripples. It's a different alloy. The hardnesses are different. Like there's so many little areas where you actually have to figure out how to do it well that it makes it very hard to outsource. The crazy thing about what you said with companies that are doing internal surface grinding is that they're bottlenecked on surface grinding.
Quite a bit.
And I guess that actually makes sense because it's not a super fast process to do well. So,
and
you outsourcing
a lot of them
to yourself.
Yeah. And a lot of them, like a Blanchard grinder is the high volume way to do this.
Yep.
But, different people have different results. There's different ways of doing it. But generally speaking, a surface grinder is going to get a better finish and be generally tighter on the thickness tolerance than a Blanchard.
Yep.
But a Blanchard is going to remove material way faster.
Yep.
And so, like, just for example, you look at a Benchmade, you can see the Blanchard grinding, like it's just the flat part of the blade. And that's just like when you get to a certain volume level, you really have no option but to go to like a large Blanchard type system. And so I'm trying to stay with that really fine finish and that really, flat, parallel, great thickness tolerance. And so I really would like to have my finish be surface ground. But to make it faster, maybe someday I could have like full sheets Blanchard ground and then surface grind to finish something. There's a lot of ways to do it.
You just gave me a lovely segue. All right. So here's the first thought exercise. Okay. What is work? So you currently have output of knives that you need to have surface grind offsite. You now have someone who is trained to surface grind and owns a machine. Okay. You see a niche in the market for the potential for more surface grinding. Like, at a point, maybe he is efficient enough to take on another client, right? Okay. So my brain in classic what is work form would go, hey, can I actually build a grinding business around this? So you're talking about Blanchard grinders. In 2 years, do you essentially start a grinding company with him as a primary and add machines because it's actually what you need for your company, but it can also be its own company.
Yeah, exactly.
And the weird thing is when you look at that, you're like, right now, the way that you're working, you feel that you are like doing your work.
Right.
Okay. Is building a grinding company work, or is that something different?
Honestly, yeah. Supply chain management, man. That's it. Because like at a certain level, when you're dealing with the supply chain, like if you're looking to grow and you're having to grow a supply chain, you also are having to talk to people that are helping you out and say like, what do you need? Okay, if I'm doing twice as many knives or twice as many of whatever, can you do that? If you can't, what would be required to do that? You know what I mean? So it's like it becomes a human conversation, and so the work becomes the relationships and the conversations and the like deep study. And so part of why I wanted to be there last night is partly because I kind of want to understand how this works.
Yep.
Because it's helpful for me to know, like in the future, if I'm trying to scale up, like what are the limitations of this way of setting up my supply chain? Right. And so I feel like I know a little more. So it's like a learning curve, a human relationship part, and all that's work. I think, it's a different kind of work than literally making knives.
Yep. So that's one job, one machine. Theoretically, the process that you guys designed last night, you don't have to go back for. Okay.
Right.
The next time you go back, no, do you do any hardened surface grinding?
No.
So so that's actually a big one right there. Say you start doing folders and you're like, it'd be really cool is being able to lap the titanium or maybe double disc. I know you can grind titanium. I've never really done it except for with like belts on a surface grinder.
I don't know much about that.
But that idea of your own expansion fueling something that takes time away from your primary focus, right? So if it ever did get to the point where you're like, man, this is crazy. Okay, we've got 12 machines and we've got this output. If you're involved in some way, that's time that might be creating value, might be creating revenue, but is pulling you from other tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So this
Yeah.
is where I struggle a lot, right? This idea of like, what is work? Podcast would be another example of this. It obviously creates value. We enjoy it, but is it work?
Right.
Like at a base level, yeah. Like you could say, like, well, yeah, okay, so it like generates a return or whatever. It's work, but I think this is maybe in the larger creative sense, and I feel like a lot of people develop their work ethic and their work habits at specific points in their career. And then it can be hard to accept new new methods or functionality as true work. I'm doing
Right.
quotes right now.
Right.
You
Right.
guys can't see that. I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. And no, I get where you're coming from. It's like if you are, let's say, like an attorney, and then you decide to write a novel, it doesn't
Right.
feel like work because that's not what you've defined as
Yeah,
work.
your muscle memory is
Yeah.
not there.
Yeah. And so I've tried to be as good as possible about like defining anything under the sphere. If it's not family, it's probably work for me,
Okay.
because right
That's
now
fair.
my hobbies are pretty much work,
Yep.
which I love. Like I don't feel enslaved by it. It's like
Yep.
exactly what I want to be doing. And so I try to watch myself, because it's like if I can't find a way to justify it as work, I have to think about that and be like, do I really want to be doing this? You know what
Right.
I mean? But yeah, I would define most things like podcasting, helping set up supply chain. Like him and we were smoking cigars and drinking Coors Light and
Right.
grinding knives, and I'm like, well, I guess this is work.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Well, and that, man, I think that, yeah, some of this stuff has to just be like timelines. Like for me, I think we've talked about this a little bit. Like for some reason, if I'm hand making a knife, I feel like I'm working.
Hmm.
Given what I actually do for a living now and my workflow, that's like not super practical. But somewhere in there, I still struggle with like for years, I would do my design work at night.
Hmm.
Even after the design work became like very valuable, I still didn't look at it as my work, my job.
Hmm. You would find that you'd put it in the margins because
You'd
it
put
was
it in
not
the
to.
margins,
Yeah.
which doesn't. So this is like one of the questions that surrounds this, right? Is it value based? Which I don't. For me, I don't think it is. There's something in there that's like glitching. That is, it doesn't. Even if something is more valuable from a monetary standpoint, there's still a strong chance that I'm gonna kind of side eye it and be like, no,
Hmm.
no, like that's not like if I'm not getting in the shop, I'm not working.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. But I feel like there's a lesson there,
Hmm.
maybe.
Yeah.
I just can't figure out what it is.
Yeah, well, that comes down to a lot of how you started. I mean, you started basically just hand making knives,
Right.
and so you're coming from a different direction. Now you're becoming more of a product manager in a lot of ways in certain parts of your business
Yep.
where that's not what you were doing. And so yeah, when you have an inversion in like your business model,
Right.
the programming of this is what I'm this is how I provide value for my brand and my business
Yep.
has to change as a
Yeah,
mindset.
it's pretty interesting. Well, and I think then the it's like this idea of like right livelihood. You watch it and you figure out like, okay, do I like this path as the method of work?
Hmm.
Right. I think in certain careers, it's like fairly linear, where with a lot of small businesses, you're actually able to shift pretty far one way or the other,
Hmm.
you know? Um, yeah, it's a,
Well, let me say this: like
yeah,
this is a philosophy I have that maybe is different than many people, but there's a lot of like mentalities out there that maybe you should do something that doesn't feel like work, and I understand that, but it can be misconstrued. And what I mean by that is like if you want to be a writer or an artist, in my opinion, and this is a philosophy that I get from my dad, but it's like if you want to be a writer or an artist or something like that, you have to treat it like work, or it's not going to be a productive mechanism. Like creativity has to be treated like work for it to
Yeah.
to
I always
perform at
love
a high
that quote,
level.
like creativity is for amateurs. Like the rest of us just show up and go to work. Like
Exactly.
there's a point
Yeah.
where you have to just be able to turn on that creative side
Yeah.
because it's what is necessitated.
And there's a book I just bought that I haven't read, but I listened to a big podcast with him. Shoot, I'm forgetting the name right now, but the main premise that he talked about in the podcast that he wrote about in the book too was the idea of resistance. Have you heard of
Hmm.
that? And what that is like that's a word that kind of broadly describes things like writer's block and
Right.
stuff like that. And he was talking about how for whatever reason we have like a voice in our head that wants to resist forward productivity sometimes, and it's like
Hmm.
writer's block. We all experience that in the shop, creative block. Like,
Yep.
you're looking at a blank page, looking at a blank screen with, CAD or whatever,
Just don't
just
know where to start.
not sure where to start. And there's that little switch that's like, hey man, your juices aren't flowing, do something different and come back to it. His point was like, don't listen to that, because if you're in this state of like, oh, the muse didn't come to me, so
Right.
I'm just going to walk away, then you're not on a path to like be successful in a creative way. Because it's like you have to go and find it, and that resistance when you feel like it's the same thing if you're doing like hard manual labor. You know
Yep.
what I mean? It's like you have to just do it, and that's the way like creativity is as well. And I try to view it that way, that it is work. You know what I mean? And it's liberating for
I'm
me.
having a response to that. Like I'll have to read the book once we figure out
And
what it actually
I will
is.
say I didn't read it,
Yeah,
but
yeah. To be
I
fair,
listen.
but you're
Yeah,
paraphrasing from listening to a pod, which is
yeah,
still relevant,
yeah.
right? For me, I feel like, yeah, I kind of want to like push against that because I think the idea of diversification, one of the values of that is you're able to focus where your focus is. Maybe like super early days, I would agree with that, where it's like, no, like you have to get to this like level of mastery and like everything goes into this. But at a point, you're also in maintenance mode. So you can't be in a growth phase 100% of the time, right?
Right.
There are times I think where having flexibility of work allows you to create space and still have forward momentum,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that you can't push through, but like, I don't know. You
Yeah.
ever heard the term don't push the rope?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
No.
like, or don't
Yeah.
fight a weak position. It's like there's a
Yeah.
point where you realize like, okay, I'm going to spend an inordinate amount of time forcing myself to do this task that for whatever reason I am not aligned with, versus, all right, today's a CAD day,
Mm-hmm.
or today's like sweep the shop day.
Mm-hmm.
Context, I think, probably matters a lot because we would have to know like what industry, what he's talking about. And like, is he a writer specifically talking about writers? And like, you,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would assume that you have some other tasks that you could probably do, but it's more linear than kind
Yeah.
of shop work,
Yeah.
right? Or creative, like physical creation.
Right. Maybe we should read the book, and
Okay.
we should have this conversation. Also, I have it sitting on my shelf in the living room. I
Okay.
it was delivered not long ago. I just haven't cracked it yet.
Edge
But
and Flow Book Club.
yeah, here we
Love it.
go. Yeah, maybe we should
Love
do
it.
that and get some viewers involved. Let us know if we should do that. But no, that I just think like if you're gonna have a hobby, have a hobby. If you're gonna do something as a job, like for me, designing and making knives, treat it like work. And if you
Right.
don't, if you treat it like a hobby, it's gonna make you the same amount of money that a hobby makes you, and it's gonna get you to where a hobby is gonna get you, which is not very far. But if you treat it like work, like you can go so much further. It's like you just hear from any professional athlete, anybody that's made it to the next level, like the best pianist in the world, the best you know musician, the best rock star, like they did treat it like work. You know what I mean?
Right. They showed up.
It's like it's almost universal, I think, to the successful, that they did kind of separate the hobby and the work, and they said, no, I'm treating it like work.
Right.
and
Well,
and
and
I,
passion, I think the idea, like, the idea of like, do what you would do for free. Like, there's all these, old adages around it. And like, I don't know. I guess there's maybe some accuracy sometimes,
yeah,
but
yeah,
like, the enjoying your work is not necessarily the same as like doing what you would do for free.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You can
Yeah.
have passion around work and still realize it's work, still feel driven to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so here, let's go back to this concept of knife company, grinding company.
Mm-hmm.
So you start this imaginary grinding company. It actually proves to be very valuable. It's more financially valuable than your knife company. Which ones work?
Right.
Are they both work? Does the fact that the grinding company is more valuable, does that take away if you're working in the knife company?
Right.
It's like there's like a leapfrog effect.
Yeah. No. I think how this could maybe be misconstrued is that like the main goal of treating it like work is to make more money, and I would
Right.
argue that that's not the case, because like you described, if another business opportunity popped up for me that was totally divergent and that made more money, like let's say all of a sudden I got really good at trading crypto and stocks and
Yep.
I just became a Wall Street guy like in a few weeks.
Sure.
I I think that when it's something I love, and that is like making my products and
Yep.
making my knives, and I love knives. I love the outdoors, and I love how they are used outdoors, and like it's kind of like a harmony that makes me happy,
Right.
and I love it. And if I was doing something different with my life, it is something that could be a hobby, but because I'm using it to fund my existence, I
Yep.
am treating it like work. But the core tenet is still that I love it,
Yeah.
but I can love it like a hobby, but it not be a hobby.
Fair.
That's the way I look at it.
That's fair.
And so it's like I wouldn't want to do something that I didn't love because it made more money. I wouldn't
Totally.
do that.
No, and none of us would be doing probably what we are doing if it was purely
Yeah.
money driven. But as you have more demands on your time, there is some relevance to figuring out what deserves your time.
Hmm.
I had a really great conversation with a therapist a while back. And I was kind of going through some of this stuff and I was like, I'm really split because on one hand, I just want to make craft. Like that's why I love learning forging. When I'm forging, I feel like I'm I'm like learning a high level of craftsmanship and I'm a good craftsman.
Hmm.
And then on the other side, I love brand building.
Hmm.
And they're so different because like one is pushing into like sales and marketing and strategy, and the other is full on free form creative, like productive work, right, with
Right.
my hands. Like you look
Hands
back and
on.
you're like, I see the work that I have done.
Yeah. It's physical versus virtual in a sense.
Physical versus virtual, right?
Yeah.
And I was like man, because our business at least is three very recognizable components,
Hmm.
right? So, me as a knife maker, us as Burnley brand, me as a designer for production companies. All of those things are at a point where they could be their own business essentially.
Hmm.
Okay. So, my question to James was like, dude, I don't know where to put my focus. And like another silly analogy, but like apropos, and I like it, is like, the idea of feeding the right wolf.
Hmm.
And his response was just, dude, maybe you have two wolves.
Yeah.
And it completely shifted the way that I was feeling because he was like, you're trying to frame this as a negative. He's like, you're framing that you like this and they conflict as negatives. He's like, what if they're not negatives? Like, it's
Hmm.
just two things that you enjoy and
Yeah.
find value from.
Yeah.
And so after that point, I was like, it created some space around, I don't feel bad when I'm thinking about like a brand slogan,
Right.
or I don't feel bad if I'm messing around in the forge and not actually generating income.
Hmm.
I thought that was pretty cool. So
Yeah.
cool. Instead of one wolf, I have two wolves. That's badass. But it's that slight reframe. And I think that with scaling, and as work changes, I actually think it's like how you frame what you're
So
doing.
for you, is forging work or is it a hobby? What do you describe it as?
I would say over the last year, a lot of things that I would have tried to separate have blended to where before I almost saw like product lines. And now I see an ecosystem, that like a creative ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything has the same bottom line or bottom line value. So I can't look, I can look at the SciPop and say, when I make a SciPop, here's my profit. Okay. I can't do that with forging. So forging might actually tie into like social media, because, hey, if I'm forging and that's like kind of interesting
Yeah.
content, I might record a little bit
Yeah.
of that. It's too
Yeah.
nebulous. Like,
Well, it's kind of like if you're a baseball player and you're doing push-ups. Push-ups isn't baseball,
right.
but it's still work, right?
I would
Right.
like you to put that on a shirt. Push-ups isn't baseball.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like, are push-ups his hobby because it's not
Right.
baseball? No, it's
Right.
still work. And it's
It's
like
all related.
you're doing push-ups when you're out there forging a blade. Yeah, it's not literally your business, like designing knives for
Right.
companies and making like saleable products and whatnot necessarily, but
Yep.
it is building your skill set, and like you're tuning your eye, and you're doing things that are productive for the rest of your operation.
Right. Yeah. Even at a point like the mental maintenance
Okay,
of it.
dependent, regardless of how you define it, do you treat it
Okay.
like work or not?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've treated knife making like work from the first knife I ever made.
Can
I never came at it as a hobby.
I say an observation and see how it sounds to you?
Lay it
I
on
think
me.
part of your success over the years has been that you are driven to treat everything like work.
Yeah, that
Does that
might
sound
be
right?
accurate. Yeah, which has its like own set of problems.
Yeah. So what are the problems?
I would say that the problems around that concept kind of fall into a very Western mindset of like, I am valuable because I produce.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a weird maker thing, and like how you end up in trades or anything else. I think for a lot of people, it's like, when I'm making a product, I feel like I'm creating value. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
weird, right?
Yeah.
I also think it ties into the hedonic treadmill, right? I produce more, I produce better, therefore I am more complete, I am happier. I work harder, I make more money. More money, it gives my family more meat, whatever it is. That method, I think, has some pretty big pitfalls. So lately, I have tried to focus less on the end result of my work and more on the act of working. Because if we're saying that work is not 100% fueled by profit, then what is it fueled by, and what purpose can we serve by doing it?
I'll say this. I'm a very firm believer, like a very, very strong believer, that we as humans have to be productive
Sure.
to be alive in a reasonably content state. Like, I believe that from a like pure biology, like pure hard science standpoint. Like if you totally become unproductive, like it's very hard to be happy. Like,
Yep.
and that is something that can be taken to an absurdity. It's just like any other facet of like human nature. It's like if
Yep.
lust can be taken to absurdity, like the desire for anything that a human normally desires, it can be taken to an absurdity.
Right.
But like there is a threshold where like a certain amount of productivity is needed to be felt for like just a balanced like sense of self-worth. Like I believe that that's a legit thing.
Oh, I completely agree. Right. That's just, I think that's
Mm-hmm.
purpose. And
Yeah.
well, okay. So if you take this from the context, like, I think a lot of our work is centered around like the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's the 8-hour workday, the 40-hour work week. It's a school system. Like, there's a lot tied into this that didn't exist prior to that,
Mm-hmm.
where you could
Can I?
even farming. Let me finish this thought
Yeah,
at
yeah. Go
least,
ahead.
right?
Go ahead.
Like seasonal work, where like you work very hard for certain seasons, and then the nature of the work changes. It's
Mm-hmm.
not that you're like, oh, I got to get my 40 hours. Definitely not like, oh, I got to get my 40 hours plus my overtime,
Mm-hmm.
right? That I think is a fairly new construct.
Right.
Doesn't mean you're not feeling satisfied if
Yeah.
you're working, 4 hours a day.
And my thoughts on that, and I agree with you, and I've thought about that a little bit too, is that like it's a lot. It may not be true, but a lot of people think that like back in the olden days, things were simpler and people were like generally more balanced and happier. Like I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of a notion that a lot of people have that post industrial revolution, there's like a little bit more of a gloom. You know, I don't know if it's true, but if it is, I think part of it is that like it used to be there was really no way to do work without immediately seeing some sort of result. Like if you plant a seed, if you till a field, if you feed a horse, like the results are like really, the feedback loop is short and narrow and small, and it's
Right.
like that sense of productivity was very easy to access in the environment around you.
Yep.
That's what the kind of jobs were. But I think maybe with the industrial revolution, there was the feedback loop became like one-sided, because it's like
Right.
if your productivity feels like it's not actual productivity, even though you're moving your hands and you're doing work. If
Right.
you're not getting the feedback loop of like, oh, that's what happened as a result,
Totally.
it's almost like the need for that is like going unmet in like a large population. And so
Yep.
it's like that's where you get this like extremism behavior a little bit of like trying to achieve to like the highest level because you're looking for that full loop to be made. And that's where I think with you, with like forging, you sit down and you make that knife, and it's like it answers that like primal need
Yep.
for, I
For
hit the
like
hammer.
cause and effect
Yeah, I
almost.
held the hammer, I hit the steel, it made a
Yep.
dent. Like I
Yeah.
think that is something that humans need, and it's
Right.
like it's just not super common anymore.
And
Um,
there's an end to it. You
yeah,
see a beginning, you see
yeah,
an end. Like that is seasonal,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
I
So
read a book a while back on work by James Suzman, I believe, and it kind of parallels that timeline from like Stone Age to like Science Age, or like
hmm
I forget how he phrased it, but super interesting. As craftspeople, I think there's some interesting like hit points. So the like even around work, right? So if you talk about work and the workday, the 40-hour work week, the concept that like when you become when you transition from the craftsperson to the manager, you now look at craftspeople as a commodity. So you have to make your craftspeople function to make more money, but you're able to scale that. And there's some like really, I think there's some like interesting extensions that
hmm
happen that start to go past like the human need of what work
yeah,
or the concept of work or what you're talking about is satisfying,
yeah.
right?
And there, and there's also just the pure like time horizon factor
Yeah.
of like the modern world and the modern economy. It's like the time horizon of the payoff for your work from a productivity standpoint might be too long for the like
Yeah.
primal circle to be met there. Because that part of that is like, for example, like when I design production knives, like it takes sometimes a very, very long time for those to come out.
Right.
And I don't know if you feel this, but I love designing production knives, and I will absolutely always be doing it because it's really cool and it's
Yep.
an awesome experience. But there is a little bit of a little hiccup in it. I don't know if you've ever felt it, where it's like, say, 1 year after the knife was designed, but it's still another year before it's going to come out. There's this lull of like a detachment
Yeah.
from the design. And it's like by the time it comes out, you're happy, but you don't really associate it with the work that was done. It's like
Yeah.
kind of like all of a sudden, it's almost like it popped out of nowhere.
That's why I actually like, I realized that doing design work for royalty is not passive income.
Right.
But in my kind of structure, I consider it passive income because I worked once. Once
hmm
that work is done, then it becomes passive. I will also say that what the way that you're framing it initially, it wasn't even that it was like detached. The first time you have to wait 2 years for a product to come out, is very, very hard.
Yeah.
You and I have been doing this long enough now that there is always something in the pipeline.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't ever think about it. Like
Yeah.
we're both designing for 2025 right now.
Hmm.
I don't, it doesn't, the
Yeah.
models I design that come out in 2 years, I'm not going to stress about it. I'm
Yeah.
not going to think about them until
Yeah.
they're out.
And I think here's one thing with you is you have been making knives all along. And
True.
so I was for 8 years, I wasn't really making knives. So all of my creative output was being broken in half into like me designing it and then it coming out years later.
Yep.
And I didn't realize like how that was affecting me until I got in the shop and like bought that CNC and like it like I felt like a primal connection all of a sudden, and it's a CNC. I mean, it's like modern. It has nothing
Right.
to do with like a caveman, but it gave me that caveman itch scratch
Ooh.
that I didn't know I was missing. Where it was like I designed the knife and then I made it, and it was like I've made knives before, so maybe I've felt it before, but like it felt different this time because it was like it is that time horizon wasn't was short enough to align with like the way I feel like our brains were set up in the first place, like pre-industrial revolution. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's like that being said, I love the new balance that I have of like I love still the wise thing to do is to design long term, long time horizon, invest for retirement. You
Totally.
can't not do that. You can't
Right.
not do these things, but you have. I think I'm not trying to like advise anybody, but for me, having some sort of productivity that has a short time horizon, even if it's just a side hustle,
Yep.
is so I don't know. It's there's something there that's like primal, and I
Well,
love
and
it.
maybe you like busted up one of my theories too, which is okay. So your first 10 years essentially were CAD driven.
Yeah.
Okay. So where I was looking at my work and going, man, I better make some time to do this design work side hustle. Your design work was the full time job with occasionally making knives as the side hustle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But as you moved into shop work, your brain is not telling you, dude, you're not doing enough design. You're not doing CAD enough.
Right.
That to me is actually interesting. And it could just be a you me thing,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
but you found new productivity that it sounds like maybe was satisfying something that was actually missing.
mm-hmm.
Did you know it was missing though?
I would say no. I would say I didn't.
Oh,
And I think I don't want to. I don't want to like give the impression that when I was doing CAD, I didn't feel like I was being productive because I did.
right.
But there's the other side of the loop is I finished like let's say a CAD model. I want to see someone use the knife because it's like the community side of it is the other side of this circle, right? Like if it's totally if you're in a black box and there's no community at all and there's like no like value extension into the people around you, that's where like that cycle is broken,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's like, well, I do the CAD and I'm like, I can't post it on social media because it's a secret.
Yeah.
And I can show it to like two people or something. And then 2 years later, it comes out and I'm stoked about that. Once again, like, I think that's awesome. But like, I think that was where something was missing. It was like, I want to do something and then put it in someone's hand. And then that loop is complete and it feels really good. I just
It
feels
makes a
great.
lot of sense. And it brings up another question too that I'm kind of curious about. And this, like, obviously, as it relates to the knife industry. Okay. So, with the rise of like these micro brands, right? Do you think that someone that is having an OEM knife produced but is not a knife maker, do they have are they getting the same attachment, same satisfaction? I guess it's like it's an unanswerable.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's situation is different. And I will say,
Right.
like, nothing about human psychology is universal, like, not a
Sure.
dang thing.
Right. Yep. As soon
Um,
as I said it,
y-
I realized that it's like you could have someone who is so psyched just to be doing production
yeah.
design for themselves
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that is everything it needs to
Yeah.
be.
But I guess all I can say is that is something that was missing in my life. And I
Yep.
think possibly missing in a lot of people's lives, possibly.
Yeah.
And like I said, it doesn't even have to be something that makes money. Like I said, it's just something that you did and you saw the result in like in front of you that someone else benefited from it
Yep.
in a like short enough time horizon that it feels like it would have felt in the 1800s to like
Yep.
deliver a bale of hay to your neighbor. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Or like a boat or
Yeah, or yeah,
whatever.
build a canoe and then you float it
Yeah.
out and you catch the biggest fish that you've caught yet because you built the canoe. You know what I mean? Like that's I think that's critical for me and I think probably a lot of people.
Oh, side, I've got a couple like tangents. One, if you guys want some cool fuel for your Instagram feed, check out First Light Boatworks.
Mm,
It's a boat builder that was on Cape Cod, and like, man, I would look at the photos of what they were doing, and I would just geek out. It's amazing. Same
yeah.
thing, and you're coming out of it like with a functional vessel,
Yeah.
right?
That's awesome.
So, second tangent,
Hmm.
what do you do for play? We're talking about work a lot. Like, do
Yeah.
you actively seek play?
So the way I operate right now, and I think it's a pretty good system, is I got my family, got kids, got my wife. So we spend a lot of time together. Right now, that involves pretty indoorsy, like, little kids. So it's not
Yep.
anything super crazy, but like reading books and stuff. So like that's a big part of play for me. Like that takes up most of the time. But what I try to do is like once or twice a year, do something like kind of extreme, not like, you know, jumping out of an airplane, skydiving, nothing crazy like that. But
So you
like,
mean extreme from a phase shift standpoint?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. So like last summer, I went on a massive backpacking trip, like 45 miles.
right,
Just it was like an absolute like soul crushing
right,
elevation gain. And
right.
it's like if I can do that like once or twice a year,
Yeah.
that like it diverts my attention and resets me, and I like doing that. But I kind of need it to be like kind of extreme. It's got to kind of push me to kind of
So
reset me.
is that is that f- so my follow up question to this is going to be to people listening, kind of.
Mm,
So I seek flow state. That's the goal, right? Like I want to go surfing, I want to go fast on a bicycle, I want to go snowboarding. Like that moment where you're achieving like almost anti self because
hmm.
you're in flow state. Do you consider like what you're talking about, like backpacking trip? Is that reaching for an edge or is that actually achieving flow?
Flow state for
Okay,
sure,
you
for
recognize it
sure,
more as flow state.
for sure. Because I'm not trying to. If it was reaching for the edge, I'd be trying to do something like be the first to summit a mountain or
Yeah,
like
you're not like Alex
invent.
Honnold. Like
Yeah,
you're not like I'm gonna
exactly.
free solo El
El
Cap and like
Capitan. No,
yeah.
no. For me, it's just like I want to get in. I want to put myself in a position where the things that matter for 4 days are totally different than the things that matter the other 300 days of
Dave,
the year. Because it
well
just
said.
like it just changes your perspective, and then I can come back and feel really good about it. So
Yeah,
I have to be doing that. And like I said, when the kids grow older, I think they can do more of that stuff with me. It doesn't have to be
totally.
extreme, doesn't have to be 45 miles, but like we're gonna go set up a tent on the river and we're gonna fish, and let's challenge ourselves to see how little of our food that we brought we can eat because we're going to try to catch as many fish as
Totally.
possible. Like
Yep.
something just weird. Like I can't wait to do that kind of stuff with my kids. But like right now is a unique time, like I said, where the kids are not even 1 and 3 years old, and so
Yeah.
it's like it's small scale.
Dude, it just
Everything's
keeps getting more and more
yeah,
fun. Like
yeah,
we've got 5.5 and 2.5.
mm,
And like it's legitimately fun.
mm-hmm, yeah,
Like we're
yeah,
going out now with them skiing.
yeah, yeah. I
And
can't
like
wait for that.
that's the thing. Like you're doing it as a family. It's not necessarily comfortable. It usually there's a few meltdowns. Like we load our pockets full of gummy bears and marshmallows and
Yeah,
we just try to have fun. Like just going sometimes is the goal.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
going to
yeah.
go out, we're going to get in our gear, we're going to slide down the hill a couple times. Cool, you
Mm-hmm.
guys are ready to go? Let's go have lunch, make it really fun. Like I love the idea of making uncomfortable situations acceptable
Yeah, that's brilliant.
and
I like
even
that.
enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, as you like, if you look at it, like a lot of what we do is work. Like, I mean, not all of it is just super enjoyable. It's just that you have found an area in it that
Mm-hmm.
creates a tremendous amount of value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I try to remind myself to do that reset that I'm talking about, but like work feels like play for me right now.
Yeah.
Like I just work, like I said, on 20 something odd hours. I'm so happy, dude.
You
Like
feel good.
when I got home at 6 a.m., I was like, I could just feel this energy like pulling me towards the shop. And
Yeah.
the only reason I didn't go to work and decided to sleep like 3 hours was because I just was thinking ahead, and I'm like, I'm going to record this podcast. I don't
Yeah.
want to totally die. But like the work, it just feels like I'm playing flag football, or like I'm,
Yeah. Well, and
hiking. I mean, it just feels
this
good.
is, I think when we had kids, this really came to the forefront because I had worked for like, I started working at my business when I was 19. I had my first kid at 35.
Mm-hmm.
I worked how and when I wanted, completely obsession driven. And, we've talked about this a little bit, but like around kids, it's not just your time anymore.
Yeah.
And so I never wanted to have that, like, I don't even know if this is actually from the movie, but like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, where Rick Moranis like comes up from the basement. I don't want to like
No.
come up from the shop and
Yeah.
my kids be like, dude, we haven't seen you in like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And in
Who
my
are you?
brain, I could do it
Yeah.
because I'm so completely engaged by just being in the shop.
I can relate to that completely.
That's a
man.
work. So
Yeah.
that's a work
Yeah.
method, right? So
Yeah.
if that's work, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, I have to adapt this method to family structure. I think just that alone can be hard to reconcile because you're like, I need to work, 15 hours a day.
But I think for me, the family side it's making me better, and I think it's honestly one of the most critical balancing elements I've ever brought into my life,
100%.
because I could be a very one-dimensional person right now if I didn't have my kids. And it's just that having the kids makes work feel like a privilege.
Yeah.
It sounds weird, but like
No.
if it makes work, it kind of makes it a carrot on a stick, because it's like I can't always work, and I know that, and I can't always be with my kids. So they both are like, it's kind of like you. I have two wolves.
Yep.
I have the work
Yep.
and the family,
Yep.
and one of them could totally dominate my life, and I'd be happy
Yep.
for a while, but maybe not forever.
Yep.
And so having them both it's a healthy
Man,
situation.
it's a long game.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that is the true. I mean, family, obviously. Work, if you start young, like nobody like thinks it's a long game. Like, I don't think most people are thinking like, hey, like, there's a point where my hands are going to hurt,
Mm-hmm.
And if you are, you're like, but I'm going to be badass and I'm going to work with my hands hurting,
Yeah.
So there's like, there's some process in there, man. A lot of like, I don't know. There's a lot tied into it, but
Yeah. If Bob
pretty
Trezzola
good.
is listening, he's like, my hands don't hurt.
Yeah. He's like,
I'm out here making knives.
You bleep.
Yeah.
Expletive.
Yeah.
Get to work.
Yeah. Right.
But I mean, that's a passion driven thing. Like, I look at it and I think sometimes, like, as I get older, there's a potential that I'll work more
Mm-hmm.
as the kids are older, as there's a little more time around the margins, or more focused. I don't know, man. So I don't know if we answered like for like what is work. And I think that probably this is something that I would like to touch in on occasionally, because I have a feeling that for you and I both, different elements of making and business and life are going to keep coming in. And we're going to be able to ask that question again, like, is this work?
Right. Yeah. I think it's a great thing to talk about, because I think compartmentalizing is kind of a good thing, I'm inclined to believe, because treating the things that you consider work like work and not like a hobby allows you to treat your hobbies like hobbies.
Right.
Because if you can't treat everything like work.
Yeah.
But if you treat the work like work and the hobbies like hobbies, I think they're both better for it.
Yeah, that's like some general mindfulness, like wisdom right there. Like, be here now. It's like, like whatever you're doing, do that thing.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Should we wrap it on that, man? I feel like
that was a fun conversation.
That was pretty solid.
Yeah. Pretty heady.
Pretty.
We got it. We got to go from surface grinding feeds and speeds to an intellectual deep dive. You just got to
Dude,
do it, right?
it's all related.
We wouldn't have
I
called it
love
Edge and Flow if that wasn't what we were going to do.
So if out of curiosity, like for those of you listening, if you want to like tag us in like a post or something, I'd be very curious. Like if you're seeking play or work, are you Edge or are you Flow?
Yeah, let us know what you think.
What's the driver there for you?
And do we make any sense right now, or
Yeah.
am I like currently experiencing an endogenous dump of DMT because I'm so sleep deprived that I'm
Which actually makes
hallucinating?
me, I can't even tell you how
Yeah.
happy this makes me that like maybe I need you sleep deprived to like fully
Right.
start conversations.
Yeah, right.
Oh man, I love it. That was super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we made any sense, but thank you guys for listening. Leave us a review, good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah.
And we'll see you around.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.